On a cold December night in the late 1970s, a small Midwestern city had its innocence shattered. An 18-year-old high school senior, beautiful, bright, and full of promise, left a brand new shopping mall just before closing time and was found hours later, brutally stabbed to death in the front seat of her family's car. For nearly 4 decades, her killer walked free. This is the story of Michelle Martinko, the murder that haunted Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and the relentless investigation that finally caught a killer nearly 40 years later. You are watching Dark Case Desk. Before we begin, please like this video, leave a comment, and hit the subscribe button so you never miss a new true crime deep dive from us. To understand this case, we need to begin with the life that was lost. Michelle Marie Martinko was born in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. To her parents, Albert and Janet Martinko, she was their miracle baby. Janet had suffered multiple miscarriages and was already in her mid-40s when Michelle came into the world. Her older sister, Janelle, was more than a decade older and doted on her baby sister from the beginning. Michelle grew up in a loving but fairly ordinary Midwestern household. She was bright and creative. By high school, she attended John F. Kennedy High School in Cedar Rapids. She joined the concert choir, took part in school activities, and had a circle of friends who remember her as kind, funny, and easy to be around. People also remember something else about Michelle. She was striking. She had long, thick, blonde hair, often styled in the popular Farrah Fawcett look of the time. She liked fashionable clothes, makeup, and looking put together. But beneath the outward confidence, Michelle had been through some very difficult years. As a young teenager, Michelle was diagnosed with scoliosis, a curvature of the spine. For several years, she wore a rigid body brace that went from her neck down to her hips. Imagine being in middle school, trapped inside a hard plastic shell while everyone around you is just trying to fit in. Michelle felt different and at times painfully self-conscious. Around the age of 14, doctors finally allowed her to stop wearing the brace. Once she was free of it, everything seemed to change. She began to experiment with her hair, her makeup, and her clothing. She blossomed socially. People noticed her beauty. But her friends say Michelle herself was almost unaware of just how much attention she drew. She joined the concert choir, appeared in school productions, and became involved in extracurricular activities. Teachers described her as a good student. Friends described her as sweet, funny, and impossible to miss. She dated like many teenagers do. For a couple of years, she had a steady boyfriend, a boy named Andy. They met when they were young teens. And for a long time, Andy was a big part of her life. By her senior year, around 1979, Michelle was planning ahead. She talked about going on to college, considered studying interior design, and looked forward to all the normal milestones: prom, graduation, holidays with her family. But Michelle would never see those milestones. Her life ended just days before Christmas. It is the evening of Wednesday, December 19th, 1979. Cedar Rapids is in full holiday mode. Christmas is less than a week away, and the brand new Westdale Mall has only been open for about 2 months. It is the place to be. Bright, busy, and packed with shoppers. Earlier that evening, the Kennedy High School Concert Choir holds its holiday banquet at a local hotel. Michelle attends the event, dressed up and excited. She is wearing a black dress, black tights, and heels. Over that, she wears a fashionable white and brown rabbit fur jacket. She carries a brown leather purse with her. Inside that purse is a significant sum of money, just under $200 in cash. Her mother had put a winter coat on layaway at one of the mall's stores as a Christmas gift. Michelle is supposed to either pay off that layaway or at least check on it. That money is meant for the coat. After the banquet, some of Michelle's friends make plans. A few go home. Others decide to go to the mall to hang out and shop. Michelle tells some of them she is going to Westdale Mall to look at the coat. She asks one friend if she wants to come along. At first the friend says yes, then changes her mind. Another friend declines, saying she has other plans. So, as fate would have it, Michelle goes to the mall alone. She leaves the choir banquet sometime after 8 in the evening and drives the family's car, a tan and green Buick. The Westdale parking lot is busy with holiday shoppers, so Michelle parks some distance away from the main entrance, near one of the anchor stores. Inside the mall, the evening is perfectly ordinary. Michelle is seen walking around, talking to friends, browsing in stores. At one point, she is spotted near a jewelry shop, chatting with a classmate. She appears relaxed, doing what teenagers did long before smartphones existed, just walking, talking, and window shopping. A friend later recalls seeing Michelle holding the cash she brought for the coat and lightly scolding her. "Put that away. Do not flash money like that around." It is not said in harshness, just friendly concern. After all, it is night, and even bright malls can attract people with bad intentions. Others recall that Michelle seemed a bit uneasy about being alone at the mall that night. She had apparently told someone that she felt like she might be followed, or at least watched, though no one remembers her describing a specific person. Sometime around 9 in the evening, Michelle is seen for what will be the last time. Stores are starting to close. The mall is winding down. She heads for the exit. Outside, it is cold and dark, typical December in Iowa. She walks across the parking lot towards the Buick, parked some distance from the entrance. There are far fewer people around than there were earlier in the evening. Investigators would later reconstruct these next moments as best they could. Michelle reaches her car, unlocks the driver's door, and climbs in. Because it is a cold night, she likely starts the engine and lets it idle. She might have turned on the defroster, waiting a moment to clear the windows and warm up. In that small pocket of time, sitting alone in the front seat, engine running, in a dimly lit corner of the lot, someone approaches her car. The driver's side door opens. The attacker slides into the car. What follows is sudden and ferocious. Inside the confined space of that Buick, a violent struggle erupts. Michelle is attacked with a knife. She fights back, hard. The medical examiner would later find close to 30 stab wounds on her body, most of them to her face, neck, and chest. She also has deep cuts on her hands and arms, defensive wounds. These are the wounds people get when they grab for a knife blade, when they throw their hands up to shield themselves, when they are trying desperately to stay alive. The attacker does not simply stab once or twice. He stabs again, and again, and again. This level of violence, what many investigators refer to as overkill, is often seen in crimes driven by rage, obsession, or intense emotion. It looks personal. It looks like the attacker is not just trying to kill, but annihilate. Yet in this case, there is a contradiction. When detectives later examine the car, they find that Michelle's purse is still there. Her cash is still inside. Her shopping bag is still in the back seat. The killer has not taken her money, her belongings, or even bothered to search the car. There is no sign of sexual assault. Robbery does not appear to be the motive. Neither does sexual violence. The attacker is focused on one thing: stabbing Michelle Martinko. Within a short span of time, minutes at most, Michelle succumbs to her injuries. Her body slumps across the front seats, partly towards the passenger side. The inside of the car is splattered with blood. The outside of the car, however, is almost clean. There are no obvious bloody footprints leading away. No trail in the snow or on the pavement. The entire horror has taken place inside the vehicle. One detail stands out to detectives later. In some of the smudges near the car door and on portions of the interior, there appear to be impressions indicative of gloves. That suggests that the attacker came prepared, wearing gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints. However, gloves are not perfect, and fights are messy. In the midst of this struggle, as Michelle fights for her life, it appears that the attacker cuts himself. Mixed in with Michelle's blood on certain surfaces is a second source of blood. Years later, that small detail will be the key that unlocks the case. But on that night, no one knows that yet. The killer leaves the car. He disappears into the darkness of the parking lot. Michelle lies lifeless in the front seat. The Buick sits unnoticed as the mall lights dim and the last staff lock the doors. In a matter of minutes, a normal winter night has turned into a nightmare. At home, the Martinko family waits. Michelle is usually responsible. She would call if she planned to stay very late, but the hours slip by and there is no word from her. Around the early morning hours of December 20th, sometime after midnight, her parents realize something is terribly wrong. Michelle should have been home long ago. Her father, Albert, becomes increasingly frantic. He calls the police and reports his teenage daughter missing. Not content to wait, he also goes out himself, driving through Cedar Rapids, checking routes he thinks she might have taken. Like many parents in such a situation, he clings to hope while fearing the worst. Shortly before dawn, police officers searching the area around Westdale Mall notice a car sitting alone, away from most of the other vehicles. It is a tan and green Buick, registered to the Martinko family. As they approach, their flashlights reveal something chilling. In the front seat, across the passenger side, is the body of a young woman. Michelle Martinko has been found. She is clearly deceased. The extent of her injuries, even from outside the car, is obvious and horrifying. The officers secure the scene. Investigators and crime scene technicians are called out in the early morning cold. Word quickly spreads through the Cedar Rapids Police Department that a teenage girl has been brutally murdered at the brand new mall. For many officers, it is the worst crime scene they have ever seen. News travels to the Martinko home. A knock at the door, a conversation every parent dreads. Michelle's older sister, Janelle, later recalls that she and her husband just held each other and cried. Their parents were devastated, their mother heartbroken, their father furious and grief-stricken. In the wider community, the shock is immediate and deep. Cedar Rapids, at that time, is not used to this kind of violence, especially not against a high school girl in such a public place. The idea that someone could be murdered in a mall parking lot on a weeknight before Christmas is terrifying. Parents tell their children not to go out alone. Teenagers who once walked freely through Westdale Mall begin to look over their shoulders. Rumors start to spread almost immediately. Eventually, Michelle is laid to rest. But for her family, friends, and classmates, there is no closure, because there is no suspect in custody. And for the Cedar Rapids Police Department, the case becomes an all-hands-on-deck priority. From the very beginning, homicide detectives have two basic possibilities to consider. Either Michelle was killed by someone she knew, someone who had a personal connection to her, or she was killed by a stranger, perhaps in a crime of opportunity. Given the extreme number of stab wounds and the ferocity of the attack, many investigators lean toward a personal motive. They start close to home. The first group of people they look at are the men in Michelle's life. That includes her then-recent ex-boyfriend Andy, with whom she had a 2-year relationship, and another former boyfriend, Mike, who had dated her in the past. Andy, who had dated Michelle for a couple of years, is a natural person of interest. They had broken up earlier that year. Friends say Michelle wanted to be free to date other people and not be tied to a serious relationship. Andy, on the other hand, had a hard time letting go. He was described by some as possessive, jealous, and constantly wanting to know where Michelle was and whom she was seeing. After the breakup, he reportedly kept calling her, asking about her personal life, checking in with friends. To some, it seemed he just would not let Michelle move on. Detectives soon learned something else. On the night of the murder, Andy had been at Westdale Mall. He admits that he ran into Michelle there briefly that evening. According to his story, it was a short, polite encounter. They said hello and went their separate ways. But the timing and his history with Michelle immediately make him a serious suspect in the eyes of investigators. Police bring Andy in for questioning. They ask him where he was that night, hour by hour. He tells them that after leaving the mall, he went home. His mother supports his account and provides him with an alibi, saying he was at home at the time Michelle would have been killed. Detectives are skeptical. While parents may tell the truth, they also may lie to protect their children. They look for physical evidence, scratches, injuries, blood, but nothing concrete ties Andy to the car or to the crime scene. Still, many in the community and some within the department quietly conclude that he is likely the killer. The idea that a jealous ex-boyfriend snapped in a parking lot fits the emotional logic of the crime. Yet there is no physical proof. Michelle's former boyfriend, Mike, who had once dated her seriously, is also questioned. But his situation is quite different. On the night of the murder, he is away at college in another city, well over 100 miles from Cedar Rapids. Records and witnesses confirm his whereabouts. He is quickly eliminated as a suspect. Even so, the police questioning leaves a mark on him. At one point, detectives lay out crime scene photos of Michelle in front of him. He later describes this as deeply painful and shocking. He never truly gets over seeing someone he once cared for in that condition. Detectives do not stop there. They interview nearly every male who had any connection to Michelle. Classmates, acquaintances, co-workers from part-time jobs, even relatives. They also consider the possibility of a stranger attack, a random predator at the mall, a drifter, a burglar who escalated. At the time, there had been at least one other disturbing crime in the region involving a knife-wielding intruder. That man becomes a person of interest, but there is no evidence directly linking him to Michelle's murder. Police canvass the mall. They speak to employees and security staff, asking if anyone saw a suspicious man in the parking lot. Most recall nothing helpful. One woman reportedly sees two cars in the otherwise empty parking lot in the early morning hours and a man standing by what could have been Michelle's car. But her information does not reach the homicide detectives until months later. By then, the trail is cold. The sighting cannot be meaningfully followed up. Investigators even resort to hypnosis with a couple of witnesses who were at the mall, hoping they might recall details of a suspicious individual. Based on those sessions, a composite sketch is created. A white male in his late teens or early 20s, with curly brown hair and brown eyes. This sketch is circulated widely, but it leads nowhere. Plenty of young men resemble the drawing. None can be tied to the crime. As weeks turn into months, the list of suspects grows longer, but none can be firmly connected to the murder. Meanwhile, the physical evidence from the scene is logged, stored, and preserved as best as possible for that era. Michelle's clothing, fibers, photographs, blood samples. The car is carefully examined and then returned to the family. But in 1979, forensic science is limited. DNA testing, as we know it today, does not yet exist. The unknown blood in the car can be analyzed only in a crude way for blood type, not individual identity. Despite the efforts of an entire department, no arrest is made. Michelle's murder becomes a cold case. As the 1980s roll in, the case remains unsolved. Every year, around December 19th, local news stations in Cedar Rapids run another story about the unsolved murder of Michelle Martinko. The anchor reminds viewers that an 18-year-old girl was brutally killed in the Westdale Mall parking lot and that the case remains open. For Michelle's sister, Janelle, and others who loved her, these yearly segments are both a comfort and a wound. They are glad Michelle is not forgotten, but the annual reminder that her killer is still free keeps the pain fresh. Her parents carry the grief heavily. Her father, Albert, becomes increasingly frustrated with the lack of progress. At one point, he even files a lawsuit against the owners of the mall, alleging inadequate security, hoping to hold someone accountable. The case goes through the courts, but ultimately, the mall is found not liable. For the Martinko family, it is yet another disappointment. In the years that follow, both of Michelle's parents pass away. Her father in the mid-1990s, her mother a few years later. They die without ever knowing who killed their daughter. For many in Cedar Rapids, the Martinko case becomes part of local legend. People will say, "Remember the girl at Westdale?" And everyone knows who they are talking about. The overall feeling is that if this case could not be solved in the first few years, it probably never would be. But the case file, thick with thousands of pages of reports and tips, remains in police storage. The physical evidence, including Michelle's dress and the stored blood samples, are preserved in sealed bags and boxes. And science is quietly catching up. By the early 2000s, forensic DNA analysis has transformed criminal investigations. Old cases involving preserved biological evidence are suddenly solvable in ways detectives of the 1970s and 80s could only dream of. In 2005, a Cedar Rapids detective named Doug, who had gone to high school during the time of Michelle's murder, takes another look at the Martinko file. The case has haunted him for years. Now, with modern forensic tools available, he believes it deserves a fresh run. While going through the paperwork, he discovers something that had been almost forgotten. At some point in the past, a sample of blood from the gear shift of the Buick had been tested by a lab. That test indicated the presence of male DNA, a profile separate from Michelle's. But for reasons lost to time, that lab result was never aggressively acted upon. It sat in the file, just one more sheet of paper among thousands. Realizing the significance of this, the detective decides to go further. He retrieves Michelle's clothing from evidence storage and sends her black dress to a modern DNA lab for comprehensive testing. The lab identifies a small but crucial spot of blood on the dress that does not belong to her. It belongs to an unknown male. When compared to the earlier sample from the gear shift, the profiles match. That means the same unknown man's blood is both on Michelle's dress and on the interior of the car. In all likelihood, that is the killer's blood. Left behind in the struggle when the attacker cut himself, for the first time, authorities have something incredibly valuable: a full DNA profile of the person who murdered Michelle Martinko. The profile is entered into the National Law Enforcement DNA Database, often called CODIS. Somewhere in America, if the man who left that DNA has ever been arrested for a serious offense and had his DNA collected, the database might find a match. Investigators wait. Nothing comes back. No hit. No name. That tells them something important. Whoever killed Michelle has likely never been convicted for a serious offense that required DNA collection, at least not in a jurisdiction feeding data into the system. Still, the DNA profile is a powerful investigative tool. The detective and his colleagues now begin the painstaking process of comparing this unknown DNA against specific individuals. They compile a list of people who have been considered suspects or persons of interest throughout the life of the case. Over the next several years, they track down as many of these men as they can and ask for voluntary DNA samples. Many agree, willing to clear themselves and help the investigation. Each cheek swab is sent to the lab, compared to the unknown male profile, and either matched or excluded. One of the first major names on the list is Andy, the ex-boyfriend who had been under a cloud of suspicion for decades. He agrees to provide a DNA sample. The result is clear. Andy is not the source of the DNA found in the car. He is formally, scientifically eliminated as the killer. For Andy, it is a bittersweet vindication. He has lived many years with the sense that some people believed he killed his high school girlfriend. Now, a simple test clears his name. But the two people whose opinion mattered most, Michelle's parents, never lived to see that proof. Investigators continue to go down the list. Over time, they collect DNA from more than 100 individuals. Friends, former classmates, people named in old tips, even the man once suspected in the other knife attack. One by one, they are eliminated. The unknown DNA remains unmatched. Years pass. The detective who revived the case grows weary and eventually hands it off to a younger investigator in the mid-20-teens. The cold case needs fresh eyes. The new lead detective on the Martinko case is named Matt. For him, this is not just another file. It is personal. His father, Harvey, was one of the original Cedar Rapids detectives who walked the Westdale Mall parking lot in December of 1979. Who stood next to the Buick and saw Michelle's lifeless body. Harvey worked the case in those early years, interviewing witnesses, chasing leads, and trying to find a suspect. He retired without a resolution. Now, decades later, his son Matt is a detective in the same department, sitting at a desk piled high with the same case files his father once read. The Martinko case has been a part of his life as long as he can remember. As a child, he saw the yearly news segments, heard the adults talk, sensed the frustration. To him, solving this case would not just be about closing a file. It would be about finishing something his father started, offering justice to a young woman his father never forgot. So Matt immerses himself in the file. Thousands of pages, endless tips, false leads, old rumors. The DNA is the centerpiece. Everything else orbits around those genetic markers. He asks himself a crucial question. If CODIS cannot give us a name, what else can we do with this DNA? It is a question that leads him directly into the newest frontier of forensic science, genetic genealogy. Around this time, a breakthrough case out in California makes national headlines. A serial predator known as the Golden State Killer is identified not through CODIS, but through public genealogy databases. Investigators upload his crime scene DNA into a site used by regular people who mail in test kits to learn about their ancestors. That site compares his DNA to its users and identifies relatives of the killer. From there, genealogists build family trees, until they narrow down the suspect. This technique is called investigative genetic genealogy. It is part science, part family history, and part detective story. Matt realizes that this is exactly what he needs for the Martinko case. He contacts a private lab specializing in this work. Using the existing DNA profile, they create a version of the data formatted for consumer-style genealogy matching. They upload that file to a public database where people have voluntarily opted in to allow law enforcement use. They wait. The first results come back. The system does not find Michelle's killer listed as a user, but it does find something almost as useful. It finds a distant relative. The unknown male DNA shares significant portions of genetic material with a woman who has submitted her DNA to learn about her ancestry. The amount of shared DNA suggests that she and the unknown male are around second cousins once removed. In other words, they share a set of great-great-grandparents. Her name is Brandy. She lives far from Iowa and has nothing to do with the crime. But somewhere in her extended family tree is the man who left his blood in Michelle's car. From this point on, the work becomes part science, part genealogy marathon. A specialist begins building out Brandy's family tree, starting with those shared great-great-grandparents. They track down census records, marriage certificates, obituaries, and any document that helps map the branches of a sprawling family. They identify multiple branches radiating out from those common ancestors and begin to follow the lines of descendants forward in time toward the present, looking for men who could have been in their 20s or 30s in 1979 and who had some geographic tie to Iowa. The tree narrows. Among all of these distant cousins and relatives, patterns emerge. One branch of the family has connections to the state of Iowa. Within that branch, they identify a set of siblings, 3 brothers, who fit the criteria. Their ages would have put them in the right range in 1979, and they have lived within driving distance of Cedar Rapids. Their names are Donald, Kenneth, and Jerry. All 3 share the same extended family line as Brandy. Genetically, any one of them could be the unknown contributor of that crime scene DNA. Now, it is up to detectives to narrow down which brother, if any, is the killer. At this stage, investigators are incredibly cautious. Genetic genealogy points toward people. It does not provide final proof. To make an arrest, they need a direct match between the crime scene profile and a fresh sample taken from a specific individual. Legally, there is a well-established method: collecting DNA from discarded items. In many jurisdictions, what a person throws in the trash is considered abandoned property, and police can retrieve it without a warrant. Detectives quietly begin surveillance on the 3 brothers. For one brother, they obtain a discarded item from his household garbage, something likely to contain saliva, such as a used toothbrush or tissue. For another brother, they collect DNA from a different everyday item, again relying on something he has thrown away. Those samples go to the lab. Neither one is a match. That leaves one brother, Jerry. The focus tightens. In late October of 2018, investigators follow Jerry as he goes about his day in a small Iowa town. He stops at a local restaurant. He orders a drink with a straw. The detectives watch as he lifts the straw to his mouth over and over, unaware that with each sip he is leaving behind tiny traces of his DNA. When Jerry finishes his meal and leaves, the officers wait. Then they go to the table, discreetly collect the used straw, and place it into an evidence bag. They send it off for DNA analysis. When the results come back, there is no more doubt. The DNA from the straw matches exactly the unknown male profile from the blood on Michelle's dress and in her car. It is the same man. After nearly 4 decades, the identity of the person whose blood was mingled with Michelle's is finally known: Jerry Lynn Burns. This revelation shocks the investigative team. Jerry is not a name that appears anywhere in the original case file. There is no known connection between him and Michelle. He has no serious criminal record. He is a married father, a business owner, a man who has lived what appears to be an ordinary life for more than half a lifetime. And yet, science says his blood is on the clothing of an 18-year-old girl murdered in a mall parking lot in 1979. If he is innocent, there must be an innocent explanation. If he is guilty, he has been walking free for 39 years. It is time to confront him. Detective Matt decides to speak to Jerry before immediately arresting him. He wants to hear what Jerry will say when presented with the DNA evidence. He picks a date intentionally. December 19th, 2018. Exactly 39 years to the day after Michelle was killed. Matt and another officer drive to Jerry's workplace, a small business in northeast Iowa. They introduce themselves and explain that they are looking into an old case and would like to talk. Jerry agrees to speak with them. They set up in a small office. Sitting on the table is what appears to be an ordinary coffee mug. Inside is a hidden camera, quietly recording. At first, the conversation is routine. They ask Jerry about his background, his life, whether he spent time in Cedar Rapids when he was younger, whether he ever went to Westdale Mall. He acknowledges that he has been to Cedar Rapids. He says he has probably gone to Westdale Mall at some point with his family, like many people in the area did back when it was new, but he does not recall any specific details. Then the tone changes. Matt tells Jerry that they have DNA evidence. He tells him directly that his DNA was found at the scene of a murder from 1979. Jerry reacts with surprise and confusion. He denies knowing the victim. He says he does not remember anything like that. He cannot explain how his DNA would have ended up there. Matt presses him. How does your blood get into the car of a murdered teenage girl you claim not to know? Repeatedly, Jerry says things like, I do not know. He does not offer any plausible scenario. No story of an accident. No explanation involving a second-hand transfer. He just says he cannot say how that could have happened. He does something else that strikes the detective. Rather than squarely say, I did not do this, he tells the officer to test the DNA, as if the science is something outside of him, something he cannot argue with but does not want to confront. After hearing enough, Matt informs Jerry that he is under arrest for the murder of Michelle Martinko. They place him in custody. During the drive back toward Cedar Rapids in the patrol car, a camera records Jerry sitting in the back seat. At one point, he speaks up on his own and muses aloud. Is it possible for a person to block out or forget a traumatic event like killing someone? To the detective, this is a chilling moment. Whether it is a guilty conscience, a strange curiosity, or an attempt at psychological distance, it is not what they expect an innocent man to wonder about. Jerry is booked into jail. The city of Cedar Rapids learns that, after 39 years, someone has been charged in the murder of Michelle Martinko. For her sister Janelle and those who loved her, the news is overwhelming. They have long since stopped expecting an arrest. Now, suddenly, there is a name and a face attached to the question that has haunted them for a lifetime. For the family of Jerry Burns, the news is equally shocking. To them, he is a husband, a father, a man who never showed any signs of monstrous behavior. They cannot reconcile the accusation with the man they know. From here, the case moves from the realm of investigation into the arena of the courtroom. In the early months of 2020, more than 40 years after Michelle's death, the trial of Jerry Lynn Burns begins. Given the enormous pretrial publicity in Cedar Rapids and the deep emotional ties the community has to the case, the trial is moved to another Iowa city, Davenport, to give Jerry a chance at an impartial jury. The courtroom is filled with a mix of people. Michelle's high school friends, now in their late 50s or early 60s, her surviving family members, curious locals, and the family of Jerry Burns. On one side of the aisle sit those who have waited decades for justice. On the other side sit people watching a loved one face the possibility of spending the rest of his life in prison. Jerry pleads not guilty. The state's case hinges on one central pillar: DNA. Prosecutors methodically lay out the story of the crime. They describe Michelle's last night, the choir banquet, her trip to Westdale Mall, the discovery of the Buick in the parking lot. They bring in witnesses who knew Michelle to show that she had no known enemies, no involvement with dangerous people, nothing in her life that would explain being targeted by someone she knew. They call the retired medical examiner, who walks the jury through the injuries, the nearly 30 stab wounds, the defensive cuts on her hands. He explains how those wounds indicate a violent fight. one where the victim fought desperately for her life. Then, they turned to the DNA. Forensic experts explain how in 2005, advanced testing of Michelle's dress revealed a spot of blood that did not belong to her. They describe how this blood, and the earlier sample from the car's gear shift, produced a distinct male DNA profile. They explain how that profile was compared to multiple suspects, and how it ultimately matched the DNA obtained from the straw Jerry used in the restaurant. They emphasize the mathematics. The chances that this DNA belongs to anyone other than Jerry Burns are astronomically small, far smaller than the population of the entire planet. In practical terms, it is unique to him. In the eyes of science, the man who bled in that car is Jerry. They show portions of the recorded interview where Jerry is confronted with the DNA evidence and fails to provide any explanation. They highlight the fact that he never squarely denies any possibility of involvement, instead falling back on phrases like, "I do not know." They also call a jailhouse informant, a fellow inmate who spent time with Jerry behind bars while awaiting trial. This man testifies that when he asked Jerry directly if he committed the crime, Jerry responded that he could not talk about it. The inmate also recalls a moment during a card game when Jerry allegedly said that if the man kept winning, Jerry would have to take him to the mall, a dark reference, according to the prosecution, to what happened to Michelle. The state sums up its case this way: there is no plausible way Jerry's blood could be on Michelle's clothing and in her car, unless he was physically present when she was attacked. Even without a known motive or direct eyewitnesses, the DNA tells the story. Jerry's attorney faces a difficult challenge. He does not dispute that the DNA belongs to Jerry. Instead, he tries to create reasonable doubt about how that DNA got onto Michelle's dress. The defense emphasizes that there is no known direct connection between Michelle and Jerry. No evidence they ever met socially. No proof he stalked her. No witnesses who saw him at Westdale Mall that night. No record of him ever being in Cedar Rapids for that purpose. They stress that Jerry has no prior violent record, no history of arrests for assault, no pattern of similar behavior. They ask the jury to look at Jerry, not as a monster, but as a regular family man who has led an apparently uneventful life for decades. They bring in a DNA expert of their own who talks about secondary transfer, the idea that a person's DNA can sometimes be transferred to objects or people indirectly through contact with surfaces or other individuals. He notes that DNA can be extraordinarily sensitive, and under certain circumstances, someone's genetic material could end up in an unexpected place. The defense suggests hypothetical scenarios. Could Jerry have touched a surface at a store, and then Michelle later touched the same surface, eventually transferring his DNA to her clothing? Could Jerry have had some connection to the dealership or service center where the Buick was maintained, leading to his DNA somehow making its way into the car? These ideas remain speculative, but they are floated to plant seeds of doubt. The defense also questions how the evidence was stored for decades. Could items have been packaged together in a way that allowed DNA to move from one object to another years later? Could contamination have occurred at some stage in the testing process? They also ask the jury to consider something else: the human factor. When a detective believes he has finally found his killer, especially in a case that has been cold for 40 years, is it possible he develops tunnel vision? That once a name appears, every piece of evidence is interpreted through that lens? They argue that the prosecution wants the jury to accept a story with huge missing pieces. A man with no known connection to the victim is supposed to have suddenly driven to a city miles away, put on gloves, armed himself with a knife, staked out a parking lot, randomly encountered a teenage girl, murdered her, and then gone on to live an otherwise normal life for the next 4 decades. Is that impossible? No. But is it, they argue, at least as improbable as some form of accidental contamination or transfer? If the jury is left wrestling with those questions, the defense says that is reasonable doubt. Jerry does not take the stand in his own defense. The jury must decide based on the evidence presented. After closing arguments, the jury retires to deliberate. They have heard about a brutal killing in a car on a winter night. They have listened to forensics experts. They have heard about genealogy charts, discarded straws, and awkward conversations in police interviews and jail cells. Ultimately, They have to answer one question. Is there any reasonable explanation for Jerry's DNA to be in Michelle's car and on her clothing other than him being the attacker? They do not take long. After only a few hours, the jury sends word that they have reached a verdict. The courtroom fills again. On one side, Michelle's loved ones sit quietly, holding their breath. On the other side, Jerry's family does the same. The judge asks the foreperson to stand. The verdict is read. Guilty of murder in the first degree. Michelle's friends and family absorb the words. Some cry, some hug, some simply sit in stunned silence, the weight of 40 years settling over them. On the other side, Jerry's relatives are devastated. They had believed in his innocence and hoped the jury would see enough doubt to acquit him. Jerry himself shows little outward emotion as the verdict is announced. Under Iowa law, a first-degree murder conviction carries a mandatory sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole. At his sentencing, the court formally imposes that sentence. Jerry is led away to begin serving the rest of his life behind bars. For Michelle's sister Janelle, there is finally a sense of justice, though not closure. Nothing can bring back her sister. But the question that has haunted their family for decades, who did this, now has an answer. For Detective Matt and his father Harvey, it is an extraordinary moment. A case that began with the father has been solved by the son. Together, across 4 decades, they have helped give a voice back to a young woman who could no longer speak for herself. Even with a conviction, not everything about the case is perfectly clear. One enduring mystery is motive. Why did Jerry kill Michelle? Was she truly a random victim, chosen simply because she was alone in a poorly lit part of a parking lot? Did Jerry harbor a secret resentment or violent fantasy that he acted out that night? Did he see her inside the mall and follow her? Or did their paths cross in some way no one alive remembers? No direct evidence of a prior relationship between them has ever emerged. Another question: was this Jerry's only violent act? Investigators have looked at other unsolved cases in the region, particularly those involving young blonde women, to see if his name or DNA might surface. So far, officials have not publicly linked him to any other crimes. It is entirely possible that Michelle's murder was a horrific, one-time explosion of violence that he then buried inside himself for 40 years. There are also strange, haunting coincidences in Jerry's life that people have pointed out. A wife who died by suicide, a relative who disappeared on a date very close to the anniversary of Michelle's death. Law enforcement has examined those events and has not publicly identified any criminal connection. What is known is this. On a December night in 1979, a man wearing gloves and carrying a knife got into the car of an 18-year-old girl, and only one person climbed out. The girl did not simply let it happen. She fought. In fighting for her life, Michelle likely caused the attacker to cut himself. He left his blood behind in that car and on her clothing. For many years, that blood was just part of a gruesome scene, something no one could interpret. But decades later, science read the story, written in that blood, and in an extraordinary way, Michelle herself helped solve her own murder. Today, when people in Cedar Rapids speak about the Martinko case, they no longer talk about an unsolved mystery. They talk about a cold case that finally saw justice. The story has become an example of what can happen when persistence, technology, and compassion come together. It is a story about a young woman who was more than just a victim. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, a singer, a student with dreams of the future. It is a story about a community's fear and grief, about parents afraid to let their kids walk across parking lots at night, about friends who never forgot the girl who never made it home from the mall. It is a story about detectives who refused to give up, even as years turned into decades. About a father and son who worked the same case a generation apart. About a family tree stretching across states that quietly held the genetic clues to a killer's identity. And it is a story about the power of tiny details. A small spot of blood on a dress, a straw in a restaurant, a forgotten lab report rediscovered in a file. 40 years is a very long time to wait for justice. But for Michelle, it finally came. Soft music rises. If you found this case compelling, please hit the like button, Leave us a comment with your thoughts on the investigation, and subscribe to Dark Case Desk for more in-depth, real true crime stories told with respect, care, and attention to detail. Thank you for watching.